Hello, and welcome back to another episode on the Unfiltered Healing Podcast. On today's episode, we are going to dig into a specific technology called Cereset, which has been utilized as a non-invasive approach to record the echo of your brain's real-time dominant frequency. And then it uses this specific technology to translate that frequency into an equivalent pitch and note that you can hear. By using specific sounds, you can actually begin to relax and unstick your brain from patterns that it might be stuck into. I love this episode, especially as an after episode to the one that we just did with Unstuck Gupta about retraining your brain, because this episode specifically talks about more of a resetting of your brain from a more physical standpoint rather than an emotional working standpoint. So I think this is a great addition to people struggling with chronic conditions, chronic pains, because we're going back upstream to the brain and where it is struggling because it's stuck in some pattern. And my guests today, Andrew and Jason, they hold a center here in San Diego region that is very brand new, incorporating this technology to help more people heal really their brain and where it is not allowing them to really relax and begin to heal itself, which is really the basis of our chiropractic profession. We just do it from a more structural standpoint. This is using a specific technology to be able to unstick the brain and get you back into relaxation. So I visited this practice a couple months ago, I think it was, and they showed me this technology because I always want to see things for myself before I share it, before I do anything. So you can know that I've gone and personally been there myself, so I can vouch for them. But I wanted to bring them on to talk a little bit more about the specific technology, because there's lots of things out there now. There's lots of neurofeedback technologies that people utilize to help get their brain unstuck. There's so many different technologies now, and I think they all have their benefits, but there's not a necessarily one-size-fits-all approach as with anything. So I think this is a great addition to just add into the bunch and to talk about how this system is utilized differently from some of these other therapies and technologies, and how it might be an answer to what you may need for your brain to relax, to stop going into these stuck patterns, and for you to really heal from a more physical sense. We talk not only in this episode about the technology itself, but also how people can get stuck in certain patterns in their brain as far as sympathetic or parasympathetic or their emotional brain. And so I think this is going to be really helpful for people to have another resource to help balance the nervous system. If you've been following me, you've been listening to the podcast for a little while, then you know my priority for every single patient that comes into my office is we first have to stabilize and heal the nervous system. You will literally be chasing downstream symptoms for the rest of your life if you do not heal what the brain and nervous system is doing. So I'm always interested in other adjuncts, other therapies, other things that can achieve this in, a different way, because we always have to first go to the nervous system and the brain. It controls everything. Even before we do these nutritional protocols and detoxing, all of those things, you have to heal the brain and nervous system first. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode. If you want more information, you can go to cereset.com with a C. I will link all that information in the bio, where you can also follow them as they're starting this journey in the San Diego region. Please like, share, comment this episode so that it can get a higher reach. We can break the algorithms where this is not being seen. We just really ask that you begin to do that and do it more often. We so appreciate that. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
What do you do to take care of yourself? Welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast with Dr. Rachel Hamill.
I ain't Dr. Phil. I'll truly help you heal your mind.
Connect with alternative medicine innovators that will challenge and empower you.
It has the potential to change your whole life.
Create natural balance for both your body and mind.
Your health is very important.
All while uncovering the truth behind modern medicine.
This is crucial.
It's raw, it's real, and it's unfiltered. Here's your host, Dr. Rachel.
All right. Well, Jason and Andrew, welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, this is fun. I've never done one yet where there's two people at once. So this will be fun. This will be a fun popcorn episode, and it'll be a good time, and hopefully reach and touch many people and free them from where they need to be free. So before we start in, for the sake of time, since there is two of you, I'd love just a brief intro from each of you. And also, like, how did you guys meet and end up doing this specific project together that you're now involved in?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Want to hop in first, Jay?
That's okay. Why don't you start? Because then I can tell how we met.
So I have another practice outside of Cereset where I work with people that come in for a variety of different things. I have like a coaching and healing practice. So I got into that because many years ago I had like a near-death experience that someone didn't have a leash on their surfboard in the ocean, and it speared me in the back of the head, and that ended up causing a brain injury where I had 3 bleeds in my brain. The board hit me so hard that my brain bounced. I had 2 bleeds in the front, 1 in the back, and that was a catalyst that basically at the time was it was a terrible thing, but actually ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. It changed my life in such an amazing way. It led me on a journey of healing. I got what I got from Western medicine. We obviously Western medicine can do so much, but with this, I kind of got dropped in the system. Nothing was really working out for me. I was being prescribed all sorts of things from all the symptoms I had. Had many issues from migraines, personality changes, speech problems, post-concussion syndrome. It was just like a nightmare of an experience. And then that led me to basically go within, learn how to heal myself, and ended up being an epic journey. That's a very long story, but that led into learning about alternative medicines. I attended a healing art school for about 8 years there. And now I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, coaches, business owners, coaching and doing healing work and supporting them, kind of life coaching work. I met Jason. Jason actually was referred to me as a client, so he was a client of mine for a while. Became really good friends, like family. He's like a brother to me. And years later, that led into what we're doing today, where I still have my other practice. It's been booming, very busy. I love it. It's something I really have a joy doing. But this other thing came about because after that head injury, many years later, I developed a chronic illness, and it was a mystery illness. And that, again, Western medicine couldn't really support me with what was happening. I ended up with food allergies. I became allergic to like almost all foods. Was down to about 3 or 4 foods that I could eat. Lost like 25 pounds. I'm kind of a tiny guy, so I looked really small and skinny. I was allergic to the sun, soaps, hot water. Ended up with mast cell activation syndrome, fibromyalgia, migraines. There was like neuroinflammation. I had speech problems again. So what I kind of put together, there was something that probably happened from the head injury that I got, and many years later, there was just kind of a load on the body where the brain injury combined with toxicity and other things over years of kind of stress on the body led into this mystery illness that nobody had answers what was going on. I got cancer scans. I had all sorts of things. And then someone actually led me to Cereset, and that basically was the first thing that eliminated all my symptoms. About 95% of my symptoms were gone and stayed gone after many years of going through this mystery chronic illness. And then basically after going through Cereset, Jason kind of was supporting me through a little bit of the chronic mystery illness, because that's stuff he does. He'll share a little bit more about that. But we ended up, it was so exciting, the results that I got from Cereset, that, him and I decided to bring one to San Diego, and we opened up in Encinita as a partnership. So kind of,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
that's aw
leaving out, but I kind of shoved it all into like kind of a box there.
yeah, no, that was great. Before you jump in, Jason, I think that's really important because it's something I see a lot too, is brain injuries. There's the whole brain gut connect. There's so many connections to the brain, our master controller, you know? And so really when that gets dysregulated for whatever reason, doesn't have to necessarily be a direct blow, but it can be, right? Then you end up having all of these downstream effects. And what you found basically, and we'll talk more about, is you just went upstream. You went to the source of where all of that happened. And this and some other therapies, I'm sure, helped you really get to the source of that. So that's really important because a lot of people, many years down the line, like post concussion syndrome, post head injuries, they do have all these problems because now their brain is hypersensitized and just living in danger zone. So
Totally.
it's powerful when you begin to reset that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So then you guys met, and did this impact you personally as well, Jason, or was it more of just learning, growing, developing?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of to kind of go backwards a little bit. I started off as a mechanical engineer, so I was not in the health world. I was not in the entrepreneurial space, um, and it was my own health issues in my. Well, it started when I was kind of 13, I would say, as I could identify them with chronic pain, and then in my 20s, it was chronic skin conditions and other things, and it was through that sort of same thing that Andrew described, and I'm sure many people can relate to, which is not really finding answers in traditional medical models for the chronic issues that we suffer from, right? The acute issues, amazing, right? Like I really will have nowhere else to go than Western medicine to deal with these very acute issues that may need surgeries and imaging and some of the amazing things. But when it came to this stuff I was dealing with, I got no answers. And in fact, the answers that I did get actually kind of led me down the wrong path. They were actually disruptive, right? And so it was that sort of frustrating experience that led me to kind of go down the same path that Andrew went down years ago, 20 years ago, trying to figure out what's going on. What is health? Where does it come from, right? How is this connected? And so in that, that was kind of the early stages of the internet, right? So I didn't go to a formal training or education at the beginning, and so it was really just me fumbling around in chat rooms and other things that were kind of pre social media, really
Rumble.
a ways,
Not
right?
Rumble. What's it called? What's that other one called? Like the secret one that people always write on?
No, I don't know. You got me.
I'll think of
You
it
got me.
later. Reddit.
But this was
Reddit. That's what I'm thinking of.
Reddit. This is pre-Reddit, right? This was like these random chat rooms of people discussing things, and it was actually very eye-opening because people would say lots of very crazy things at the time, and then I thought about it, and it kind of had a little bit of a logical sort of aspect to it. So this kind of led me down a new path of discovering what health is, and long story short, I ended up changing careers to kind of follow a path of integrative health, integrative medicine. I don't want to say medicine because I'm not a doctor and I don't use medications. I was never licensed, which was a fantastic path for me because I could work with people all over the world, right? I wasn't subject to the restrictions of a licensure. So I was working with people basically via word of mouth. And the people who would find me tend to be people with cancers, autoimmune conditions, syndromes and symptoms that don't have names, or maybe they've been given 10 different names, right? And they couldn't find answers with all of the integrative practitioners they worked with, and naturopaths and osteopaths, and you name it, right? All of these amazing doctors. And so working with people in that way really opened my eyes to really what's going on, right? What's really happening, right? And when I thought it was one way, I kept getting these clients that would come in that would present with such extreme cases that the tools that I had they weren't adequate. And so I had to keep expanding my toolkit and or expanding my knowledge base so that I could refer out to people like yourself that have specialties to address some of these very complex conditions. And so in that process, I started to open up to the deeper aspects of how trauma, conditioning, early life experiences, and then of course physical traumas, head blows, the things that Andrew described, how impactful they really are, and how they can show up 15 years later, right? And you don't even really realize what the origin of it is because it was so long ago. Same thing with some of the mental and emotional and sexual and physical traumas that we experience when we're younger. So a lot of this stuff boils up at such an early age. And that was my sort of discovery of this stuff. So by the time it came to meeting Andrew, I actually was intending to meet him as a friend. We had a mutual friend who was connecting us, and he's like, "Oh, you got to meet Andrew. You'll love him. You guys would totally connect." So I texted him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, just go to my website, book a session." I'm like, "A session? Like who does this guy think he is?" So I'm like, "All right."
It's coming in
Yeah. I'm like, I go to his website, and he's not cheap. Okay. Like he does high level work with a lot of people, and he's in high demand. And so I'm like, I'm not paying a few $100 to see this guy. I don't even know what he does. I just wanted to get coffee with him. What is this? And so, but the more I sat with it, I'm like, you know what? Whatever. This is kind of my world, sort of self-development. Like, let's go see what this guy's got. Right. So I go in, and first session, like, we connected in a way I think that was not typical for most sort of client practitioner relationships. And so there's something deeper there, I think, that we kind of both recognized. Well, I know he did. It took me a little bit longer to recognize. But then as we were kind of working together in that first session, I realized, oh, wow, this is something different. Like he's really tapped into something here. And I instantly knew it was something that I wanted to investigate further, both as a client with him and also in the work that I do. And so that really became like probably an 18-month or 2-year kind of journey with Andrew specifically. And a lot of this is developmental work. It's childhood work. It's a lot of the wounds. It's a lot of the attachment issues and relational kind of struggles, and all aspects of being human kind of come up in those sessions. And then I ended up going to sort of the same school that he went to for 8 years. To kind of get some further training, and ultimately we became friends and interested in kind of working together. And we didn't even really know what that looked like, to be honest. We actually started off looking at a variety of different businesses, and sort of investment type opportunities. We both have a huge desire to impact the world in a way that's going to create that's going to ease suffering. That's going to create a lot more ease and well-being, right? And so there's so many ways we can do that, right? So we're both open to that. And then Cereset kind of presented itself as an opportunity for Andrew, and I watched that progression take place, which is wild because in the health field, I'm privy to a lot of technologies, and I hear a lot about all kinds of things and how
Sure.
amazing they are, and I don't disagree with them. It's just it tends to be that this technology is really amazing for a very select group of people for in certain circumstances, and generally speaking,
Yes.
they're kind of just decent for other people, right? And these are things that are like 15, 20, 30 grand that people are paying for, like very expensive things. And so when Cereset came about, there was a handful of people that I'd never heard this before that said, um, Cereset was the thing that kind of got me over the hump. Like people that were really struggling, there was a number of people that said this was the thing that they felt like really helped them turn a corner. And so that like really it stuck with me. And then watching Andrew go through his process, it was like, holy smokes, there's something here that's really unbelievable, and I need to investigate this. And so that was kind of the beginning of us opening Cereset, and kind of a desire to bring a technology which we feel is pretty unique to an area that I feel like is very open to this type of thing, and it's a very very needed thing. So we're super excited to kind of find ourselves partnering in this way.
Yeah, we call those divine
Totally.
connections. It's not coincidence, not by chance, There's an alignment that happens for an opening that you enter into. So that's beautiful. And I also really appreciate, you guys as males also talking about, and I think it's becoming more and more because there's a greater recognition happening of just how important, like the mind and traumas and mental. But I think for a long time there was such a either stigma or just pride. There was so much where um, the male species was not even willing to talk about that or go into that. So yeah, I just commend you both in that way, to be able to bring that forth and to be like, yeah, no matter what, we're all human and we all got stuff, and doesn't matter if you're a man or female, like you got to work on your stuff. So I commend you for that. It's a big part of healing. Thoughts are huge, patterns are huge. So I just commend you both on that and speaking about that, because it's kind of rare. Um, so what impacted you guys the most specifically about this technology? And I mean, you can popcorn or you can say what you thought impacted you the most. You kind of traced on it a little bit, Jason, but I'd love for you to talk about the impact of it a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, Andrew's experience was truly amazing. But for me, well, let me just say this. At the beginning, I wasn't totally sure what this technology was and how it was different than some of the other things like neurofeedback. I watched Andrew go through an
Yeah,
amazing experience that I'm excited for him to share here. But at the same time, it was so vague in what it was doing, and it's a patented process. But it did have research behind it, right? Like the University of Wake Forest was doing studies on this, and athletes are using this, and the military is using this, and so there's kind of a body that's out there. It's not this amorphous type of thing, and so I was a little unsure. And then as we were taking more and more people through, the stories that I heard outside of our office started to come into the
yeah,
office, and that's what really was like, okay, this is something really different. And watching people go through the process was really wild because, and for those, just to kind of give a little context here, this technology is something that we use EEG sensors on the brain, right? So we just put these sensors on the brain, and it's just reading the electrical activity of the brain. Like that's it. That's all it's doing, and then it feeds that information back into the person via earbuds. So it's just these tones that reflect the activity of the brain. That's all it's really doing fundamentally. So it's reading the brain and then playing tones into your ears. And so for me, it was like that was a little hard to believe that such profound impacts could be realized from something like that. But also, the important thing was that it's not doing anything to the brain, right? So that was a big thing for both Andrew and I, is that we don't want to get into technologies. It's very dicey when you start playing with things like that are powerful and that can impact, that they're sending energy or doing something to the body or the brain. Like that's a very dicey territory. This is just playing
sure.
tones, like music. And so the fact that it was passive in nature, and that it was the brain and the body healing itself, just that thesis was something really that I could get behind. And then when I watched it unfold, and started to see the data reflected, and watch people's experiences literally in one session, watch what's happening to them. That's what struck me. Like that's what kind of finally it landed in my system. Like I was kind of bought in before because I saw and I heard, but now I was watching it take place, and that's really what did it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to
If I
expand on
was-
that, Andrew?
Yeah, I'll hop in. I agree with Jason, everything he's saying, obviously. And uh, one of the things that he mentioned, I'll mention again, is that I love is that it's, I'll say it a different way. It's utilizing the natural wisdom, intelligence of the body to heal itself. The body knows how to heal if we set it
Yeah,
up for that. Right? We set it up for success and create that environment for the body and brain to heal. And Lee, the guy that created it, he was attacked many years ago. He got actually beat up by a bunch of kids with a baseball bat from behind. They beat him with a bat. And he ended up with brain trauma. And he was like many, like kind of a very similar story. He was feeling like he wasn't getting he wasn't I think one of his words is like he felt disrespected in the medical world in Western medicine because they weren't believing his symptoms. He was going through this nightmare, and
sure.
he was depressed, and he had all this range of symptoms that we're not getting better. He was paranoid, walking around with anxiety. Um, I remember reading a story. He would go into like restaurants and sit in a booth with his back against the wall to make sure nobody's going to attack him. He was just living in a bubble of fear and symptoms. And he's an engineer, and he took his math skills, his engineer skills, his kind of um, just a combo of what he knew with science and technology, and little by little he analyzed his brain and used EEG technology to map his brain and began to develop this technology, and how it allowed the brain to set up that environment for the brain to see itself. It's brain mirroring technology, so the brain can find where it's out of tune and begin to tune itself. So it self tunes, self corrects. And I was doing other things that really supported the process. It's not like this is like a silver bullet. This is going to be the thing that's going to cure everything and do everything for everybody. You have to participate in the process, but it allows for the brain and the body to get unstuck, for the healing, the natural healing wisdom to take place, because the body knows, the brain knows. And when kind of what Jason was saying, these tones, you listen to these tones, I thought it was ridiculous at first, but I was so desperate. I was like, I've done alternative things. I went to a Cereset center and I sat in this chair. I was like, what is this going to do? This is so dumb, to be honest. And I've done so many things like that are like way out there, but this one just felt, it was like passive. I'm in a dark room. I'm in this chair, and I'm like, nothing's going to happen. And for me, it started happening right away. It can happen in 5 sessions or 10 sessions where you start to see results. For me, it happened sooner. Some people might need a little more, depending on their stuckness, their injury, the toxicity in the body. Uh, they might need 10 sessions, 15 sessions, but it's not forever. But for me, I saw results after the first 5 sessions, and that was the most surprising thing. I was like, I'm already noticing shifts and changes in my body and my experience. And I was sold right away. I was like, I needed, like Jason, I needed to learn about this technology. I didn't have to understand how it was different than neurofeedback. I wanted to know. Obviously,
Yeah.
the most important thing for me is that I got better, and nothing else was doing it.
Yeah. And I had a similar experience where I went through all of these things. And then it was a guy who created his own method using magnets. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, there's no way this is going to do anything. Like, but at that point, I was desperate. And so I was like, well, you know, do whatever you need to do. And sure enough, it was, the one thing that started to move the needle. And so, yeah, sometimes you just have to kind of go outside of the box and get outside of yourself, and you get called into your calling. So that's amazing. Did you yourself like try any other types of like feedback therapies before Cereset as well? Or
No, I haven't. I never felt called to, like, I never felt called to like neurofeedback or anything like this. I know a lot of people that utilize it. I know it takes many sessions to get well. I kind
yeah,
of just follow what feels like intuitively aligned. Like, I've done a lot of work meditating, deepening my connection to my body. Like after that near death experience, that head injury, like I said, I kind of I turned inward and started to see where conditioning and there was issues going on from development, and I really started listening to my body, my heart, and my mind, using all these different
yeah,
intelligences of the system, and it felt called to Cereset. I did 60 hyperbaric chambers. I did acupuncture. I was doing energy medicine. I was doing developmental trauma work, and I was doing things with Western medicine. I was trying many, many things: naturopaths, detoxing the body, mold detoxing, chemical. What's it? Metal.
You
Go
did
ahead, Jason.
retraining the brain too. That was a big one, right?
That's right.
That kind of like
Dynamic
gave
neural
you
retraining.
a little bit of a hint
Right.
of like there's something here at the brain level.
That's right. That's a good reminder. So there's something called dynamic neural retraining system, DNRS. There's also something also similar called Gupta program, and there's a
yeah.
few
I just
others.
podcasted with him.
Oh,
Yeah, he's
okay, cool. So these are great. That's cool. I'm gonna have to listen to that podcast. So what that hinted to me, I started noticing subtle changes that nothing else was really doing. It's like, oh, there's something here showing me that there's a limbic injury. There's something going on with the brain. And that led me to understand that I needed to look at something like Cereset. So I had those programs are great, but it felt like Cereset um, amplified that process and is like similar to that process, but more passive and easier because it takes a lot of dedication. Dynamic neural retraining is like an hour a day, and you got to do these movements and these sequence. And I was very dedicated, and I did it for 6 months, and it helped to some degree, but it didn't eliminate the symptoms. It made me feel a little better. But the Cereset, it feels like it amplified that, but that led me down the path of neural retraining. I didn't do any neural feedback, but it was neural retraining.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important because you're right, like a lot of those therapies require a lot more energy to even burn a new brain pathway to make that function. And so you have to have the energy storage and resources to make that work.
Totally.
And the reason I also mention that is because, like, I personally, I've utilized with patients different neurofeedback therapies, and they've worked great for some things and not so great for others. And what I also enjoyed when you scan my brain is you actually, which we don't really get in some of these neurofeedback treatments, is you got like a graph and you got different areas of like the sympathetic, parasympathetic that were functioning in a certain degree or where they were at level wise, and then also the emotional brain. And I thought that was really useful as well to kind of also see visually and have some sort of data to start and finish with versus just, we're just going to use this neurofeedback and see how you feel more like verbally write things down. I love that this was also utilizing a visual representation. And we see a lot of people really stuck in that sympathetic overdrive, and you can visualize that. But there's also the opposite side, which does happen as well, which is kind of stuck in the parasympathetic, probably not as common, but it does happen. Um, could you guys maybe give some examples for people based on what you've seen or researched or know of how that might manifest in a person kind of stuck in one of those sides in their brain?
Yeah.
You want to hop
So
in, Jason?
yeah. So this is what was really interesting for me was that um, learning how to read the data. That was kind of a little training process that we needed to go through. But once we kind of got a handle on that, what was really wild was to get to hear people's experiences as they walk through the door, and then see their data, and it mapped out like almost perfectly, right? And oftentimes we can interpret the data, and there would be part of their story that they left out for whatever reason, and yet we can see it on the data. And so when we point it out on the data and we show them, they go, oh yeah, this and this and this, right? So it was really wild to see this sort of mapped out. And it was so right on that it actually shocked all of us. I'm not shocked anymore, but it's so interesting to see it play out. And so generally what we'll find is that somebody that's kind of stuck in a, let's say, anxiety kind of pattern where they're hyper anxious, they're very alert, they're hyper responsive, quick acting, right? Things are happening kind of fast. It's this kind of panic anxiety that may be expressing outwardly. And you may know some of these people that kind of have this more high anxiety energy. Um, or it may just be happening internally in the background, and they may not exhibit it outwardly. Um, Now, there's ways to kind of feel into that, but what when we see something like that, we'll tend to see this sympathetic overdrive show up on their chart. So we look at is the frequencies of the brain, right? So there's 0 to 100 is kind of what we look at, right? And often these are called delta, theta, gamma, beta, right? There's all these kind of terms that are not totally applicable or necessary. In fact, we can get more granular than those terms. But these frequency ranges that the brain utilizes can be understood, right? The higher frequencies tend to be more of the cognitive processes that the prefrontal cortex uses. And the lower frequencies tend to be more of kind of the subconscious patterns that the brain utilizes to communicate. And so when we see these things show up as out of balance in the more lower frequencies, and they tilt toward the sympathetic side of the equation, which is kind of the more anxiety driven. Well, then that indicates to us that whatever the sort of anxiety pattern that's being exhibited is actually probably rooted in the subconscious. So there's something happening from early in life that we may not even be able to identify. Now, there's in other processes, in other modalities, we can process that those, let's say, that stuckness. It's probably the best way to say it because it's a stuck pattern. It's actually a neurologically stuck pattern, as well as it can be a mental loop or emotional loop that's stuck as well. But we can go through and process those things with various forms of therapies and other modalities. With Cereset, what's wild is that we can process that on the neurological level such that the person doesn't have to go through and re-experience these things. So there's no processing of some, let's say, sexual abuse that happened at 2 years old. We don't have to go relive that. Now, there may be value in doing some of those other therapies, so I don't want to sort of deny that. But what I'm illustrating here is that we can actually get to those by addressing the neurological stuckness, showing the brain, hey, you're stuck here, you're operating in this stuck pattern, and then it knows. It goes, oh yeah, okay, I see that, and knows how to self-correct. So it's really wild to be able to see on our charts where they're out of balance and what might be the origins of that. And when you can show somebody that, there's this deep validation and confirmation that happens in their body. It's like finally, I see what's happening, right? Somebody gets me. Like it's a real deep like exhalation that can happen when you feel like I'm finally understood. I'm sure you see this all the time when people come to see you. And because people fundamentally first, they just want answers. They want to be acknowledged that what they're experiencing makes sense. And so when we can show them that, there's something that's just that kind of kickstarts the healing process right there, because it's finally understood that they're validated. And when they go through the process and they're just resting in a passive way, the brain self corrects. They don't have to do anything. Um, it doesn't mean that there may not be a process that unfolds or work or participation that happens in the sort of month-long process that we take people through. But in that session, they can just relax, right? So that's kind of one example, is that anxiety, this kind of high-strung energy, can finally start to calm down. And on the other side, some people are a little bit numbed. They're a little bit shut down. So you might know these people that they get exciting news and they don't even really express excitement, or they don't even know how. Like there's kind of like just this numbing out. And for those people, that's this that are stuck in this in this shutdown mode, in this dorsal vagal shutdown. And we actually need to get them over into the sympathetic. So we actually need them sort of that sympathetic kick to start to activate, because that is a good thing. The sympathetic charge is good. That that fight or flight mechanism is very, very important for a lot of different things. And so we need that aspect of ourselves. And so when that's shut down, to get that to kick in is a very important process. And that can sort of bring some people back to life, so to speak. And so when we see people on the shutdown side, it's more like um, tend to be a little bit more depressed, a little bit more kind of apathetic, lack motivation, um, uh, just kind of doled out with life. Tend to be a lack of energy. Lack of energy can be on either side, to be honest. So there's patterns that can be exhibited that are that can go both ways, but in that sort of that shutdown mode, it's really the sort of key characteristic is this sort of numbed outness, this kind of emptiness that tends.
Yeah, they call it like the freeze response, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's when certain like education I've had on the nervous system, and there's therapies that do this too, but it's basically called like neurological recognition. So it's like someone flipped the switch in the breaker in your nervous system, and it keeps firing off that same pattern of information until, like you say, what this does is it scans it, and then it allows the brain to recognize where that pattern is, recognizes it, and then it can kind of self-correct. You close the door, you flip the switch that got braked, and then it recognizes the faulty pattern and begins to get back into balance. And that's just what I'm sensing is what you explained. Because that's how we learn too,
Well,
you know?
well this to me, there was a key point in my understanding as a practitioner with health that I think changed my whole paradigm, which is that the key to healing any chronic illness is generally in what the parts that are stuck. So like the aspect of getting stuck is a really, really important thing to understand. And this stuckness can happen at the mitochondrial level, which is an organelle inside the cell. It can happen on the nervous system level. It can happen in the mental processing. Like we just get stuck in these negative thought patterns. It can get the emotional patterns can get stuck in an operation, right? And then just the physicality, like whether it's fascia or whether it's the structure, right? Like so when we can find a remedy, a therapy, a therapist, or modality that can help get the body, mind, emotion, neurological system unstuck, now it can self correct. Like the wisdom is always there. It's just this kind of stuck operation that tends to happen. And I think part of it is because we're so adaptable and we're so conditionable as beings. In other words, you get us going in a certain direction, we tend to stay in that direction. And so oftentimes we just need a little like bump, and it could be a cranial reset. There's so many different things that can help us get corrected. And once that stuckness tends to get unstuck, and we can recondition it into a proper balance, then it kind of stays there, right? So for me, that's like it's a really key aspect, because oftentimes there's this perception that something about me is faulty or it doesn't work, or I need this other thing in order to be balanced, healthy, and thriving. And the reality is you may just need a little bit of a nudge, and then you're off and running. Like that's all it's taking, right? It's just finding what aspect is stuck and how do we get it unstuck.
Yeah, it always goes back to the balance because you need the sympathetic and the parasympathetic in balance. And I think, that's also what's made like some of these really well-known doctors now, like Dr. Amen, is because he's scanned the brain and seen the different regions and then supported those areas with the same concept in mind, is creating a healthy, regulating brain response. And so, yeah, it all goes back to like, back to the brain, scanning where it's at, and how do we regulate and keep things back into balance.
Yeah, and finding that safety, right? Like when Andrew got struck in the head with a surfboard, his body and brain went into this survival mode. And on some level, it never fully got out of it, right? Like, yes, he recovered to a large degree and was functioning to a high degree, but there was an aspect of his system that got caught, that got stuck, and it was never able to fully recognize, oh, the coast is clear, we're safe now, like everything's actually okay. So there was something happening in the background, as subtle as it may be. And this guy does a lot of meditation. This guy does a lot of work, a lot of work, a lot of therapists, and so it's not like he was neglecting anything in particular. It's just there was something neurologically in the tissues themselves, likely, that just got stuck.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Do you see this when you do sessions with people? I see this often where they've had trauma to their head in some way, and I'm in there doing cranial work and releasing, and they have this huge like emotional, physical release because it's just like you're saying, your fascia holds on to patterns, trauma, your body holds on to it. So it's like you moved that stuck pattern, and then they just release all of this stuff. And you're like, wow, I guess a lot was stuck in there. Do you see that a lot in the Cereset sessions as well?
I see it in my work, and I mean, I see it in other work as well. In Cereset, yeah, there's memories, old memories that start to surface. A lot of people start to cycle through things, and smells, I think, show up. There's emotional releases. There's also sometimes there's a step, what we call like a step forward, but it looks like a step back. Meaning sometimes people feel a little bit worse before they feel better. That actually happened to me briefly. So there's things like that can happen. The pendulum kind of swing where you start the symptoms show up more. Emotions might flare up more. A little more anxiety could show up more. Um, I know somebody that went through it that had a lot more anxiety showing up briefly, and then that swung into a greater energy and more balance. So we have to educate people on that to make sure they know. We don't want to set expectations. We also want to we coach along the way, We support them in every way that we can, according to what feels aligned with the Cereset process. So we do educate people on these things can happen. But yeah, emotional releases, all sorts of things can happen in these processes, and it's all really good, and we want to normalize that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
I was
and
just going to say real
how does
quick. There was
like
I
okay.
a little bit different of experience, but I was getting a deep tissue work like this. It was a body worker, and this wasn't like a massage. This was like he gets in there with this tool and just like you're a piece of meat, and he's just like releasing all this stuff. I mean, I actually kind of like pain, so there's a little masochist in me there. But during this process, like I could feel the benefits that he was doing, even while it was the most painful thing I'd experienced by a body worker. But he got to this point in my shoulder that he was releasing, and instantly emotions started flowing, and memories, ideas. In other words, I understood what was being released, which was how I was used as an athlete, as a baseball player by my coaches because I was one of the better players. And so I could feel this like sadness that I don't even know that I recognized at the time, but there was a recognition of like, I'm being used. They don't care about my well-being, and they're just going to continue to abuse me for their own sort of benefit. Right. But I could see like also the ignorance of of my coach's process too. It wasn't like this intentional thing, like, they're hatching a plan. It was just, but it was a neglect, and I could feel that. So there was an emotional release of neglect. So these type of things I only say that because these type of things are embedded in our tissues. They're embedded within our bodies and our brains and our minds. And so as we get these things unstuck, these things can come pouring out. And in Sarah I would say it's not quite as intense as some of the other things. Like some people will have a little bit of a somatic experience. Usually it's kind of pleasant. They'll have usually the memories that pop up are random. They're like, oh, my fourth grade teacher did this one thing one time, and it's not a bad experience. It was just a random experience. So it's really fascinating to watch these things pop up. It tends to be that it's more easeful. Actually, we noticed that there's not a lot of this like things that are processing in huge ways during the experience. As we kind of shake the snow globe, over the next few weeks, things can pop up sort of unexpectedly. That tends to be what we see, is that we're starting to untangle the yarn, and things are happening, and it can look like bliss and joy and childlike wonder, or it can look like struggle and confusion and what have you. And it's all malleable. It flows so quickly. So it's not like something that you get stuck in. It's more of like you're moving through something. Even the joy part, it tends to be this like a little bit of an experience, and it kind of normalizes. And then, so it's all just kind of very loose and flowy. But what we see after a month or even more, it's like people just stabilize to this new normal of well-being, and sometimes they don't even recognize how far they've come because it's now become so normal. So it's really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, you don't know how good you can feel until you actually get into healing, and then you're like, "Wow, this feels great. This feels amazing." And that's the point. We wanna live optimal lives, right? Wanna live as optimally as we resign designed to function, and so that's what we're always striving to do. Um, can you guys explain a little bit about specifically how sound, because you were explaining how you use these EEG things and then it uses specifically sound combined with that. How does that specifically sound in itself begin to regulate and harmonize? Is it like specific frequencies or?
This is where some of the magic lies in the process. This is like when you so it's this is a closed loop system that the brain is sending the signals through the EEG technology, and immediately it's getting the feedback is from the sound. So uh, there's no conscious trying to no consciously efforting to try to change anything. So in this closed loop, the brain is immediately hearing the sounds, and something the brain is somehow recognizing. Oh, I'm out of tune here. I'm out of tune here. Something is happening here. You could probably do this with um like sensational like sensation as well, like it doesn't necessarily have to be sound, but sound has a little bit more of a magical quality. There's something to sound that makes it probably a little more impactful. But this is where the magic lies. Like it's like asking, like, okay, you cut yourself, the body heals, right? How does that heal? What's actually where's the intelligence that's healing that? Well, it's obviously super intelligent. There's an intelligent wisdom that keeps the body moving, pumping blood, the heart. this miracle of a system, and the brain is that, like, one of the most miraculous things that we've seen. It's amazing. It's like this biological technology that even feels like I'm minimizing this miracle that we are walking, right? So when the sound comes in and the brain does the work, we don't know exactly how it's doing it. Plus, Lee has it kind of, it's a patent, like it's a patented technology. So there might be some sort of other things that we're not clear on. My hunch is, and I've heard Lee on an interview once saying, like, he was experimenting with all this, but he had this, like, kind of that where you said earlier, this divine intervention, this download that gave him this kind of that eureka moment, that intuitive hit of like, try this. This is what's going to help the brain. And it kind of came in through this like divine download. So there's a little bit of this magic in this process as well. And that's my answer. I don't know if Jason, you have another answer there, but
Yeah,
you can throw in whatever.
I just want to add a little bit to that. Yeah, because as Andrew said, like, we don't really know. I mean, Lee may, and I'm sure there's some deeper neurological experts out there that understand how sound impacts the brain much better than we do. But what I've noticed is that, on some level, it's similar to neurofeedback, right? Neurofeedback is typically a visual stimulus that you're interacting with, trying to get a plane flying through a hoop or whatever, and your brain somehow interprets that visual information and does something with it. That's an efforting, right? Like, there's an actual, like, I noticed when I do neurofeedback, there's a part of me that shows up that goes, I'm going to be the best. I'm not going to get this next one wrong, right? So there's these little pieces that come in that aren't related to relaxation. And that's how Cereset's different, is that it's completely based on relaxation. You're laying down, your eyes are closed, and that's what we want the brain to be balanced in. We want the brain to be balanced in rest. And so that's how it's totally different, and it's passive. Now, to the sound piece, I've been around the world with some amazing spiritual teachers and indigenous elders and religious groups. And what you notice is that they all use sound. There's something deeply, deeply, in fact, it's probably the only universal language other than maybe math, right? Is sound, right? Everybody uses music and sound. Somehow we instinctively know a note that is on key, that is tuned versus not on key. We don't know how. We just instinctively know. Like, so there's something deeply, we use it in all healing arts. It's used, whether it's in the kind of chanting or the mantras, or this goes back thousands and thousands of years and crosses continents. So something about sound is deeply, deeply healing if used in the right way. You can also think back in your own personal experience when you hear some kind of, now smell works this way too, but there's something neurologically linked, right? When you hear a song from high school, and you not only remember high school, you can actually kind of feel high school. You can kind of, you can feel what it was like. For me back in the 90s, I can feel the 90s differently when I hear a song that was from that era, right? Same thing with a smell, right? So these types of things, there's something neurologically linked with sound, and I think smell, and that is a little bit different than perhaps eyesight, which is that when we hear something, there's an emotion so it's like emotion, it's memory, it's the sound itself. So I guess what I'm pointing to is that, like, there's something deeply, deeply magically happening at the neurological level, to the point where this type of thing's been used for thousands of years all across the world. So I think whatever whatever clicked for Lee in that moment where he decided to use this, that him following that really was a really key factor to why this is so much more effective than other similar technologies, is because it's utilizing sound in a very simple way, mind you, but the brain is able to interpret sound and link it to a variety of parts of the brain in a very, very unique way. So it's a really long and roundabout way of saying we don't know. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
It is cool. And it is important because, I mean, you're right. Like, music in itself can change a whole atmosphere, it can change the tone. Um, worshiping, things like that can change. Do you know if he specifically found, or if like, are there certain sound, like, hurts? Because I've heard people talk about like this specific sound hertz is really beneficial for this, or this is beneficial for this. So like people will listen to like specific music with this specific hertz, or they'll do something with this. Did he utilize that specifically in this, or is
No,
it just like a
no.
Not as
okay?
far as we know. I don't think so. No, that it doesn't seem to be using that. Like I know what you mean by the different hertz levels. There's like the heart frequency,
Well, there's
the different
432,
frequencies.
right? 432. So they tuned everything recently to 440, which is a little bit out of tune. And the reports and all the sound health experts that I know have said that's actually bad for our health. Whereas if you tune it to 432 hertz, it's better, right? And then there's the 528, which is kind of the heart, right? And all these other things. I don't think he went to like that level. I think it's much more simple actually. And in fact, it's not a harmonious thing. You're not listening to music, right? It's actually just like this bing bong. Boom. So it's just a feedback mechanism that's quite simple. I think at its origin.
No rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's in the
The,
algorithm.
the, the, main, the simplicity of it is that the brain, we're getting the brain to relax. The brain sees itself, the brain relaxes, and it's generating new neural pathways of parasympathetic rest relaxation. And it's these baby neural pathways that are beginning to create these grooves. And the more we do it, eventually they strengthen, and that becomes our baseline. And then sky's the limit to how much well-being can be encoded. So the trick is to just continue to build these neural pathways using neuroplasticity, strengthening them, and staying in that. Somehow the tones are allowing the brain to start that process, create that process, and then strengthen that process. And it's just a very simple, natural way to allow the brain to relax. And like Jason said, no conscious effort. It's not like neurofeedback where you're consciously efforting. So it's a very simple, uh, interesting process. That's why I said earlier I was skeptical. It's like almost too simple. But yeah, so go
I
ahead,
was just saying
Jason.
there's another key aspect here too that is really important, which is that virtually all of the therapies that I've seen in sort of this brain world and elsewhere are outside in, right? So it's an outside process to try to impact the neurology, right? And that it works, like it does work. It can take a little bit longer, and you may miss some parts, and it may be dependent on the practitioner or the modality that you're working with what kind of results you're going to get. This is a completely inside out process. So you're literally going directly to the neurology and saying, you're out of balance. This is too high. This is too low. Like this is right. And so when you start doing that, then the neurology from the inside out can start to shift. And now the external representation of the person's experience can then be reflected into the world. So it's the only one I know of that is kind of inside out in that regard.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of the basis of our whole chiropractic training too. Is obviously it's a physical thing, but the basis is to take out any interference so that the body can get back into healing itself. So it's the same principle in sense, going back to the nervous system, healing it. What conditions would you guys say that Cereset excels in the most in helping?
So the way we frame that is, so Cereset balances the brain, and then in turn it will support many different. A balanced brain will basically support many conditions, right? So kind of there's a wide range of symptoms and conditions that it supports, but we look at like sleep is a big one, insomnia, anxiety. Um, there's post COVID, like long COVID symptoms that it can support. From, for example, like me, I had a chronic illness, and it wasn't specifically saying hey, Cereset will help this chronic illness, but it did for me. It shifted many different symptoms there. We look at concussions, PTSD, so first responders, military. I remember reading an article again before getting into Cereset that Lee worked with like 6,000 to 8,000 military with supporting PTSD. They've done a lot of work and research on this. Um, there's what am I missing, Jason? There's a bunch there
Yeah,
probably
I
that I'm
mean,
missing.
anybody that's experienced something that is a stressful event that has either been acute in its nature or has persisted for a long time. So somebody that's dealt with mold toxicity for a long time in their body, that you can actually clear the mold. And I've worked with people like this, where you clear the mold, you clear the other things, and the house is cleared. They may even move. You clear the other toxins and things in the body, and then the neurology stuck in I'm still suffering from mold, and so that you actually got to get to the neurology. And so things like that, where this is what confuses people, I think, a lot about some of the chronic illnesses, is that they actually have cleared them. That has resolved. It's just other things that are still stuck in this pattern of sort of sickness. And so anything that's been chronic in nature, that has persisted for a long time, any hugely traumatic event or stressful event, even something like a move across country, or a job change, or a divorce, or anything like that.
Stress in general. I mean, we're living in a hot
Yeah.
society of, high stress, and stress is extremely bad for our health and our body. And a lot of people think they're relaxed, and they're actually not. They don't realize what relaxation is. And I see it time and time again, where people think they come to me, they work with me outside of Cereset, and they're thinking they're pretty chill. I was like, we'll see what happens in a few years. And they look back like, oh my God, looking back, like I couldn't believe how not chill I was, like how not relaxed. So this is great for just getting the body and brain just to relax. You feel just everyday stress, right? People are struggling with money, struggling with finances, like their family, just it's great for all these different things.
And we've got some people that are like that are more of the kind of optimizers, right? They're entrepreneurs, or they're personal development people, and that's kind of what they do. Like, they just keep wanting to get better. So we have those people, and when they come in, they recognize that when they come in, it actually gets them to a place of balance in their life, and so they keep coming in for that reason. It's not that they need to; they just recognize the benefits. And then, but to kind of the core of your question, it tends to be people with PTSD, head injuries in the past, really high anxiety, or kind of debilitating depression, anxiety kind of symptoms. We've had some kids come in that are kind of emotionally dysregulated, can't totally relax. I don't like to use the word spectrum, because people throw that around pretty loosely, but if there's kind of ADD, ADHD type of behavior, that type of thing. In other words, there's just not it's the inability to relax in the system that can be really, really effective. And then, well, there's another one. Oh, memory loss, like things like cognitive issues. So, if people that are a little more on the elderly side, they're kind of forgetting their keys every now and again. So that early cognitive decline, we can actually help to kind of, let's say, stimulate, so to speak, those areas of the brain where we can develop new neuronal pathways that'll lead to kind of the slowing of that process, and a maintaining of cognition. So we get a wide spectrum, and we're always working with people to figure out what is it that you're really here for, and let's track these things. And we're gonna track the subjective side of the equation with you, and we have the data as well. So we'll track the objective and the subjective and see where we go.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I think it's important for people to know there's a difference of relax and peace. You can be relaxed, but not in
Totally.
peace. And
That's right.
so when you
That's
get
absolutely.
into that zone, it's like there's infinite possibilities, like you're saying, of being able to help. Because when you live your life in a lens of peace, then a lot of things shift. Now, how do people more find out more or get access? Is this just a technology that's kind of in private practices right now, or is it like in major clinics? Like, what's the reach of where people could find it?
Yeah, there's over 60 locations actually and growing around the U.S. We're in Encinitas, California, San Diego here. Um, so there's a good amount of centers out there. So there's practitioners, and there's different centers like ours that are available for people to find. Cereset.com. You can find the different locations there. Um, Anything else there, Jason? I'm missing.
No, I mean, they can call or email us. That's another, if they're local. Our phone number is 760-642-5884. So that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us, is to call. You can also email us at
San Diego.
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you
Please.
can email us
Go
at info@encinitas.cereset.com as well. And really, we find that people have some more questions and they want to figure out what the process looks like. So, generally helpful to get on a call with somebody. But this process really is it's one of the fastest ways for people to kind of get over the hump. And what we like to do too is we have a big network that we find that there's other people that we work with, other practitioners and therapists that can be very helpful for all the people that come through. And so there's a real positive effect when you're working with a variety of modalities, right? Like, this is what I think Andrew and I have both found over the years, is that there's not just one thing that somebody needs and then they're good. It's like sometimes that one thing can unlock something and make everything else that much more effective. But it's usually it's a combination of therapies and techniques and modalities in this process that never really ends, of discovering oneself in a deeper way, right? So it's useful to utilize a variety of modalities.
Yeah, and I just want to say that just kind of piggyback everything that Jason's saying here. Um, you know, one of the deeper missions, part of why we opened, is really to support people in that process of getting well, getting the people that are stuck, that don't know alternative things like this exist. Like, that's the core mission. Like, it was a nightmare for me trying to figure this out. So, we want to invite practitioners like yourself in San Diego and Sanitas area, all over San Diego, to come in to learn about it. We want to build networks of kind of referral networks in San Diego with the practitioners, and just really get to people that are suffering, that are not getting better, that are essentially stuck, that we're talking about here. So that's the deeper mission. Like, I'm hoping to get this out, and we are already doing that, starting to spread, starting to get the word out. We're excited about that. So we're really grateful that you had us on, and we got to share this with you today.
Mhm.
Yeah, amen. That's why we're here, is to help others. So, thank you guys again so much for taking time out today and coming on. The goal is, like you said, to enlighten someone to this information so I can help them achieve where they're stuck, where they're at, where they need help. So, thank you again. And for anyone that is listening, please like, share, comment this podcast so that more can be reached. More can hear about this. Let's blast this out to not just locally, but globally. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. And we'll catch you all on the next episode.